Hello, hello, hello. We have a video for you guys today. Peterson versus some 25 atheists. I've been hearing a lot about this particular video. It's been getting a lot of attention. A lot of people think that the atheists actually did some on Jordan Peterson. But really, they should rename this video to one atheist versus 25 atheists, right? That's what they should really name it. But anyway, let's get into it.
My first claim, atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting.
True. This is true. Atheists don't understand that God is not just a empirical creature that exists in nature as a phenomenon. God is not a phenomenon. He's not a event like, oh look, there's a historical thing like this war that happened or the moon landing, or it's not a thing. God is not some event or thing. Jesus dying was and is, however, he's not just that. He's an entire paradigm. He is the thing that underpins our very foundation of reality, and therefore you're not going to be able to use a microscope or some kind of empirical observation to find God, because that's not what God is. So when they say, I don't see any evidence for God, I reject God because there's not enough evidence, they are misunderstanding him because they think God is a piece of evidence. They think God is a empirical phenomenon, where he's not. He is a paradigmatic, transcendental entity, right? So people need to understand that. Let's enter the circle. Look at these bozos.
Good afternoon, Dr. Peterson.
How are you doing?
So this claim...
They all wanted the attention. Okay, let's look at this guy first. No complaints. His face looks a bit soylent. Doesn't work out. The hat's a bit wide. Too wide for your head. Makes your head look very wide. You almost look like he looks like that Wreck-It Ralph fixer-upper handyman guy, the blue guy with the hat. He looks like that. Otherwise, shirt's fine. Can't complain. But let's get into it.
Here, that atheists don't know what they're rejecting.
True.
My background is in studying to become a traditional Catholic priest, daily mass, daily rosary, going on long retreats, deep into the magisterium and biblical hermeneutics. Like, I was thoroughly in it.
Really, then? Because most atheists... Well, I would say you're an exception, then. I'd say most people are not like you.
And it seems like I do know what I'm missing. Is there something that I missed over years of study, both this issue formally and living out religion so deeply?
Well, you obviously feel that you missed something when you were practicing for the priesthood. Your aim was off then. So
And
there's
so-
always the possibility that it's still off now.
What was off about my aim in the first place?
I don't know. That might take a long time to figure out. But
Then it seems kind of like this no true Scotsman type of fallacy in which you're the arbiter of people's aims and how they understand those aims to be. How is it that you can...
That's a good point. Peterson would need to clearly say what exactly they're missing. It should really start with Peterson saying atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. Well, what are they supposed to understand about him? Because I gave a concrete answer as a Christian, but how can Peterson, as an atheist, make the claim that he understands what God is, but the other people don't? Then really the onus is on Peterson to come forward and make the claim that, well, actually God is this. Atheists think it's this, but it's actually this. Because I feel like that distinction to say they don't understand that it's this, that this has to be defined, and Peterson hasn't really defined it. And this guy's asking kind of a valid question. He's saying, okay, I was in the study for the priesthood. I did theology. I'm still an atheist. What am I not understanding? And Peterson's like, well, I don't know. Okay, but you're the one saying they don't understand. So what is it that they don't understand?
claim that people don't know something that you know about their life despite not having met them?
well, it's obviously a generic claim, just like the atheist claim that there's no God is a generic claim. In your case, it would have to be specified more, and I'm not claiming to understand what
No,
was...
but the onus is on you because you're the one with the proposition saying that they lack understanding of something. You have to define what that something is to assert that they don't have an understanding of it.
going on in your mind, but my experience with atheists is twofold, is that they have a very reductive notion of what constitutes God, let's say in the Judeo-Christian tradition, and they've often been hurt by someone who was religious or by the religious enterprise or perhaps by God himself, so to speak, and that's left them with an animus.
But I think that you have a reductive view of what atheism is. You've defined religion so broadly to include any sort of having aim in life, any sort of cultural archetypes, or having a metaphorical substrate. And atheism to you is a very specific type of like 3 people in the world that are these Raskolnikov type of, they want to get away with the perfect.
Did they spell atheist wrong? Let me pause real quick, guys. Nope, I spelled atheist wrong. I've been putting the I before the E. Well, now you know. Of course, stupid Alex O'Connor, this retard, pops up. Okay, so what are they saying? Atheists are reductive and kind of stupid. I would agree. But he hasn't really substantiated it, like, because he's not a Christian, so he can't provide the Christian position. So Peterson is not really defining his terms very well.
Perfect murder. It seems like you have the reductive view of what an atheist is.
I need to change the title then.
Let's start with your claim. How do you define the God that you're rejecting? Like, what is God to you? You studied in the church, you found that unsatisfactory. How would you characterize what you rejected?
I think the average Christian believer.
But wait a minute. Is that really fair? Why do we leave the definition of God up to the atheist? Because he could just define it to mean whatever he wants, pose a straw man, and then defeat it. Oh, you just believe in some sky daddy. It's like, well, no, that's not what I believe. That's not what God is. That's not what we claim God is. Why, Jordan Peterson, is God something that the individual gets to define? I mean, there's hundreds, thousands of years of church teaching. I mean, even Christianity aside, going all the way back through the Abrahamic religions, there's millennia of texts describing the nature of God, describing God's nature and his actions throughout history. It's not up to the individual to decide, and Peterson, making the affirmative claim that atheists don't know what they're rejecting, really needs to be the one who provides the sensible alternative definition, right? He needs to be the one to assert that, not this guy. And really, nobody's given an answer. Both him and Peterson are like, well, what's it to you? It's like, well, God isn't something the individual gets to define. That's such like a Protestant bullshit answer.
Or when they say that they're Christian and they believe, they mean some sort of God that is all-powerful, all-perfect, is somehow involved in the matters of this world, and that we look to them through wisdom.
Not everyone believes that. I mean, as a Catholic, some people believe that we only view the created effects of God, not that he's personally involved in the affairs of this world. Not all Christians believe that, but just so we're sure.
And with the Logos incarnate in Christ. And it also seems like you don't believe in religion in the way that the average Christian says that they believe in religion.
True.
And there are as many gods out there as there are believers, because everybody has mutually exclusive and different views of what God is.
True. That's something people, and he just made an argument against perennialism, which he didn't even realize he just did, but he just made an argument against perennialism, which is they have mutually exclusive claims. That's a really important thing to understand, that we're not all just appealing to the same God, quote unquote, because we make mutually exclusive claims within our own theology and definition of God. So God is a specific thing. He's not just a general perennial thing. And that's actually an important thing to point out. So I think he was lampshading, bringing up an argument that Peterson could have made and destroying it before it was even brought up. So that was actually a decent point.
So it seems
well, if everybody had mutually exclusive views of what God is, no one could speak to each other.
What do you mean no one could speak to each other? Why? Why does that have to be the case? I mean, Jews reject Christ, the Logos. They view him as a unitary, so they make exclusive claims all the time. No one said it was totally exclusive, but elements of the theology are exclusive. And that's kind of the point to defeat perennialism.
Yeah. The mere fact of communication presumes a commonality of assumption and definition. And it's certainly not the case that I regard any archetypal manifest.
Well, wait a minute. I mean, this isn't really the point, but I'm just going to interject. Doesn't that presume communication in the first place? I mean, what if we don't actually have effective communication? What if, when I talk about God, your understanding God is completely different, and we actually aren't communicating effectively? So isn't that begging the question a little bit? Because that's the thing in question, is like, do atheists and Christians have an understanding of the God when they either accept him as Christians or reject him as atheists, right?
Manifestation whatsoever as equally religious.
This creepy
so that's not a real claim. Let me give you an example. For example, there's a sub-narrative in the story of Moses where Moses is rewarded with a glimpse of God. Okay, and that's one of the ways that God is characterized in the Old Testament stories.
Yes.
Now, Moses is a faithful servant of God and a good man. At least that's the case within the confines of the story.
One possible
It's
interpretation.
the case within the confines of the story, obviously.
Well, not obviously. When we look at the Bible can't precisely say anything because there are so many different exegetical and hermeneutic views of this particular book.
No, that's a fallacy. Saying that there's a multitude of perspectives does not undermine the exegesis. Or what's the other one? Indogesis. What's the opposite of exegesis, guys? Eisegesis. There we go. Drawing in and importing. There we go. Okay. But it doesn't undermine it as a epistemological tool, just simply because idiots take different things from it. So that's a fallacy. It's called the fallacy of what is that called? Multiplicity, maybe? I forget what that's called. Might not. It's not ad populum. Well, it's basically the fallacy that just because there's multiple perspectives means that it's unknown, or that we don't know, or that there can't be truth or falsehood derived from something simply because there's a multitude of perspectives. We'll find that out later.
And that everybody has agreed or everybody has disagreed historically on. It seems like
I guess that would be an ad populum argument because you're appealing to or a consensus, right? You're appealing to consensus. You're appealing to a lack of consensus. So, well, there's not a consensus around this thing. Well, that assumes that a consensus ad populum is what defines truth, but it's not.
Even the most benign detail about a book this big, and it seems like you can only say that the Bible says something if you first presuppose that it's univocal.
So your claim essentially is that Moses in the Old Testament plays the role of a villain or is irrelevant? Because the alternative claim is that he's good.
I'm saying that we can't know, because we can't talk to those authors.
Well, you're not a Catholic, because that's definitely not a Catholic perspective. I mean, you literally reference exegesis. So are you undermining the possibility of divine revelation and preservation of the infallibility of the text? And it feels weird, because if you were studying to be a Catholic or Orthodox, you would have like the epistemological tools to use. They wouldn't be undermined by this kind of low tier argument.
Are going to start with the presupposition that there's nothing I can say about any of these stories that you're not going to disagree with from the perspective that there are multiple potential competing claims, then I can't speak with you. So
and we also have a short time here, so I want to get to the core of what you're arguing here, and I'd love if we could.
The core of what I'm arguing is that atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. So I'm trying to give you an example of what's being rejected and its complexity. Okay, so God rewards Moses with a glimpse of the divine. So this is a definition of the God that atheists are hypothetically rejecting.
A possible one.
I said I didn't say the. I said
That is possible, yes.
Okay. So despite the fact that...
It's weird, like someone like Peterson is going to look at scripture like Moses and be like, oh, well, there was this thing in the Old Testament where Moses saw the divine. It's like, he's just going to brush past all of the church doctrine, theological history, ecumenical councils, defining the nature of God as a triune being, defining the Christology, right? Like, these are things you would actually talk about if you were going to define Christ and say what someone does or doesn't understand about God. You wouldn't wait, I just realized something. Actually, it's Jordan Peterson who doesn't understand what he's rejecting. And the guy was actually right, because they make mutually exclusive claims. Like, Muslims believe in a unitary Allah, same with Jews, Yeshua, and then Christians believe in a Trinity. And then there's even divisions in Christology amongst various Christians. So So what position does Peterson take? How does he understand God? What does Peterson understand God to be? Wherein he can make the assertion that atheists have the wrong conception of God. What makes sure Peterson has the right conception? Because are we going to appeal to Peterson and his definition of what he thinks God is based off these Old Testament Jungian archetypes that he's projecting onto the Bible? Or are we going to look at actual Christians, actual religious scholars, right? And he made the point that, well, if you look to religious scholars to define God, the problem is there's a multiplicity of religious scholars who define God, who make mutually exclusive claims about God. So what can you appeal to if you're an atheist to understand God? Because if I look at the Christian God, then I might say, well, why is that the God to reject? As opposed to, say, the Judeo God or the Islamic God. What God am I supposed to reject? Do I have to reject all of them? Or am I rejecting a particular one? And on what basis? And who's the authority on the definition of that? Right? So it becomes a huge problem in terms of epistemology when you don't have a particular worldview. Right? So it's like, for Peterson anyway, it's very, he doesn't have a Christian paradigm. So how is he going to argue for a particular definition of God when he's neither a Jew nor Christian nor Muslim nor Buddhist nor pagan nor Gnostic? How's he going to argue for any particular definition and say, well, you don't understand him because this is the correct definition? Well, Peterson, you don't have a definition because you don't fall into any denomination. So on what grounds are you going to say that this atheist doesn't understand God? You don't have any conception of God that makes sense or adheres to any tradition. So yeah, I just realized that was actually a good point that guy made.
Moses is a stellar character, and he's had a long and difficult life and can withstand a lot of difficulty and travail. God puts him between two cliffs, so he can just see a crack of what's in front of him. And when God walks by, he allows him to see his back. Okay, so the implication of that story is that the divine is fundamentally unknowable. It's a pinnacle experience, and that people in their final...
God is not unknowable. If you're a Christian, you don't believe that God is unknowable. We can experience his energies. We know about elements of his essence. There's mysteries surrounding God, but the idea that he's completely unknowable, I mean, that's absurd, right? I don't think any Christian believes that he's totally unknowable, because theology, therefore, would be a waste of time.
Finitude have to be shielded from a comprehensive vision of the basis of reality. Well, that's not the God that's defined in that manner, right? It's not a simple personification. It's not a...
It's so funny watching atheists try, like Peterson. He's trying to project his atheistic worldview onto the Bible and then somehow derive from his paradigm of reading the Bible some kind of definition about God. Whereas as a Christian, we already have the theological tools to articulate what God is, what he's supposed to be, his nature, how he's defined, the language, the terms, the history. And yet we have this like atheist, like Jungian Jew, Gnostic dude who's like, well, according to how I saw Moses in the Old Testament specifically, because I don't want to offend Jews by including the New Testament, I think God is kind of like the divine. Yeah, that's what, like, he's trying to read the Old Testament from the perspective of an atheist, not realizing that you have the complete wrong, arbitrary, subjective paradigm for reading and understanding this book. So he's just making shit up based on what his own atheistic interpretation of the Bible is. And it's really funny to watch him struggle on understanding God when we Christians already have like a very clear, articulate system for this that's been developed over thousands of years, defining terms, giving concise definitions, and approaching God from the correct paradigm, which is as a believer. Because it doesn't even really make sense to analyze God as an atheist, because you would just believe it's a fairy tale. You would just believe, well, it's made up, it's not real. These people are just engaging in some evolutionary, like instinctual, I don't know, like paganistic behavior. You would just view it like paganism. You'd just be like, all these people are creating, manifesting out of thin air some kind of conceptual abstract deity as some kind of like primitive cultural tool. It just makes no sense. So he's trying to like reconcile shit in the Bible in his head, and it's very funny to watch atheists do this, because ultimately it's arbitrary and it's absurd, and it's approaching a fundamentally religious book and fundamentally divine book from the perspective of a non-believer, and it makes no sense.
Simple old man in the sky. It's something that in its essence is unknowable and overwhelming. And that isn't, in my experience, the God that's defined by atheists who are attempting to undermine the story. I mean, it's the same claim, for example, that you're a finite creature and that you face something that in the final analysis is unknowable, and that you have to establish a relationship with it regardless of your inability to perceive or even withstand perceiving the whole. Okay, is there a problem with that?
I mean, the problem is that when we look at
What the fuck was that? I don't even know what that was. It was like a whole lot of nothing. All right, let's go on.
famously, when you've been asked, do you believe in God, the question becomes, what do we mean by God? And in the Bible, it's not even clear the biblical authors know what God is, because Yahweh has historically emerged from an early storm god, a deity that doesn't exhaust the category of deity, and that has changed over the Old Testament. Does God have physicality? Does God not have physicality? It seems like, yes, if you define religion to
I don't think God's changed over the course of the Old Testament. No one would agree with that. And what kind of assertion, what would you base that on as an atheist? You're like, well, God's changed. See, it's like from your subjective interpretation of what it means. So no.
mean anybody that has an aim, anybody that looks at the unknown, anybody who wants to go from chaos to order is inherently religious, then yes. But also in the same way, I could define atheist as somebody who doesn't dogmatically believe in a religion, or somebody who doesn't regularly attend religious services or belong to a denomination.
Here's a better way to define atheism that I think would be better than what these guys are trying to assert. Instead of making it about God, what you could do is you could make atheism a position where you reject all of the conventional religious perspectives and paradigms on the basis of internal critique. You could say, well, I reject Christianity because I believe it's incoherent, or I believe it is logically faulty, or it doesn't make sense. Right? And then you could say, well, I reject Judaism because XYZ, XYZ. And then you individually go through each religion and reject them on some basis. Because that's a good point. If you define atheism as rejecting God, the problem is that, are you going to reject the Christian God? Well, now you have to reject Allah because he's different. Now you have to reject Yeshua and the Old Testament God as some unitary force, because that's different. The Jewish conception of God is different from the Islamic perception of God, and the entire theology and mechanism of God is different in these religions. And then you have to reject the Christian God, then you have to reject all the pagan gods, then you have to reject all of the Norse mythological gods, then you have to reject all of the Indian gods, Hindu, different I don't think, do they have gods? Are they deified? I don't know, but you would have to reject all the gods. And simply being an atheist who rejects God, quote unquote, doesn't actually define what God is or what you're rejecting. So that is a good point, but it could be skirted by simply individually rejecting each system that involves God, which you could do, but you would have to do it as a whole.
Help, especially the audience, kind of like boil this down. There was a lot of words there. That the central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
A central claim.
A central claim is that we exist somewhere between the finite and the infinite.
No, I said that we were finite and we had to establish a relationship with the infinite.
Yeah, then in that case, then we're all religious, but then I can do the same thing and define one particular element of atheism. It seems like we both have a reductive view of what the other side looks like, to the point where a conversation seems...
What they're really figuring out is that individuals have their own paradigm, and since they're approaching things from a paradigm level, there's not going to be a perfect resolution between the two. That's really what they're recognizing is, wait a minute, I have a paradigm, you have a paradigm. We're kind of talking past each other because we're approaching the conception of God from our own paradigm. And that leads to an impasse. That's really what they're slowly figuring out.
Incoherent, and not just incoherent, but not in the way that the average Christian understands Christianity to be.
Do you have a problem
let's
with...
pause there. Sorry, you've been voted out by the majority.
Oh gosh.
Hey, how's it going? Nice
How
to meet you.
doing? Nice to meet you,
David.
David, good to see you.
Tell
It's a
me,
wacky hairstyle. They'll look gay. I think every single person in this room is currently watching gay furry porn. But anyway.
tell me everything that you know about the Polynesian deity Lono, L-O-N-O.
I don't know anything.
Okay, so what was the point of this? Polynesian deity Lono? Now I want to know. The Lono god. Oh, it's Hawaiian, you idiot. You idiot. It's Hawaiian. You idiot. It's actually a Hawaiian god, and it's from Captain Cook. You idiot. Anyway. I think this is going to be a gotcha. Ha, well, you didn't know about this god. So do you reject him? How can you reject something you don't even know?
About the Polynesian deity Lono.
So you're rejecting something without knowledge of what you're rejecting.
Yep, that's exactly what it. You don't know anyway. Yes, that's possible. Yes, because I can make a general statement like I reject pagan gods. As a Christian, I assent to and believe in, have faith in the one true Christian God, triune being of God the Father, Jesus, the Son, the Logos, and the Holy Spirit. That belief implicitly knocks out and makes impossible within my worldview any pagan god, because I believe in one God, which is the one true God, Christian God. So I don't have to know about the pagan god Lono, because he's implicitly rejected within my paradigm of Christianity, right? So the same would be true for an atheist who says, I don't believe in God. Well, what about this God? You didn't even know he existed. I don't have to, because my paradigm is that of rejecting God as a whole. But now, this would work for me as a Christian because I have concrete beliefs about God. But as an atheist, I just finished saying that you would actually have to go through each individual God because they're different. There is no generic God where the God in Judeo religion and Islamic religion and Christian religion are somehow all the same God. They're not. They're not referencing the same being. They're completely different beings with completely different natures, completely different understanding, metaphysic, mechanism, completely different. And so therefore you would have to reject them individually because they're not the same, right? Now let's say I believed in Allah. I would implicitly reject any other God because believing God to be Allah and having the attributes that he does, that would imply that I reject the Christian God. That would imply that I reject the Jewish God and pagan gods and Hindu gods and whatever else gods by nature of my belief and profession and belief in this particular God. But for someone who's an atheist, you're not really taking an affirmative stance. You can't really say, well, my affirmative position, my definitive belief is that I don't believe in God. You could say I believe in no gods. I do not believe in the possibility of the divine or the supernatural, extranatural, or whatever you want to call it. You could do that. You could say, I think, well, that would be materialism. That wouldn't really be atheism, right? I mean, that'd be a different thing. There's a term for that called materialism. There's nothing outside the physical. There are no gods. There are no beings that have power that created our universe, that exist outside of nature. But if you're just taking a generic atheism, as most people understand it, by saying, I reject God, well, wait a minute. There is no unified generic God. There are particular gods to particular religions, and you would have to go through each one and reject all of them. So this guy is actually making a good point, where he's saying, oh, well, what about this God? Do you reject him? Ha, you didn't even know he existed. So how can you reject something you didn't know that you existed? And there's many more like Lono. What about the flying spaghetti monster God? How do you know that he doesn't exist? How can you have a worldview that rejects something that you don't even know exists if you're not making some kind of generic claim, right? So I think the atheist position, this could be solved by just redefining atheism to avoid this word concept fallacy, to avoid this perennialist understanding of God as this unified being across all religions. He's not. But instead, you would need to create a better definition that says, I reject anything divine. Anything that claims to be divine, claims to be supernatural, ghosts, demons, spirits, gods, creatures, unnatural. I reject all of them. If you were that would solve it. So that's what you could say, is it's just really, they're still arguing about the definition of atheism, and this is really just like this is a thought experiment, this Lono thing. This is a thought experiment to help prove the absurdity of atheism.
I'm not rejecting it. No more than I'm rejecting anything that I don't know anything about.
Do you believe in Lono? Do you believe that he is a deity that exists in the world, exists in the universe, that exists in the existence of everything? Do you believe? Does
he have valid ontological status, is what you're saying?
Believe that Lono
I'll
is
answer
a
that
being?
question once you answer my question, which
no, that's a tu quoque.
is, do I reject everything that I'm ignorant of? Because that's your presupposition that undergirds your argument, and unless you can prove that that's valid.
Nope. No, you can be ignorant of particulars while still asserting generalities. For example, I could say, I dislike all black people. Oh, well, but you didn't know I exist. How can you dislike me if you don't even know I exist? Because you're enacting a principle, right? So you don't have to know everything about every particular to make general claims, right? That's just kind of absurd. It'd be like saying, I can't even think of an analogy because it's just very dumb.
Valid, then there's no point.
My question is quite simple.
Yeah, but that doesn't mean it's formulated accurately.
Do you believe that Lono exists? Yes or no?
I'm not going to answer that question for the reasons I just described. You already insisted that if I reject something, that if I'm ignorant of something, I reject.
But you can reject it because you don't have to consciously reject it. I don't have to be like, let me think. Does Lono exist? Let me go through the evidence. Think about it. I can reject him on principle. I can reject him ipso factum, automatically. I can reject Lono because as a Christian, I believe there is only one true God, and by nature of an extension of that belief would be that I reject any other gods. Very simple. So you can do that. I don't have to know about every particular Polynesian god. I just operate off principle, and ipso factum, automatically, I reject any false gods.
Do you think that everyone in the world has to know everything simultaneously for that to be valid and true?
I think in order for your argument to be true, in order for it to be true that we atheists don't understand what we're rejecting, then you need to also apply that to yourself and to Christians and to Muslims and to any other person on this earth where if you don't understand what you're rejecting.
That's actually a good point. Because that's kind of a good point, because the atheists don't have a definitive set of principles on what they do believe or what they don't believe. They just say, well, I reject God, which is a vague, arbitrary statement. And what if I present something that doesn't quite meet the definition of God, but is close to it, like maybe a Norse god? For example, let's say I'm an atheist and say, I reject God. Well, what do you mean by God? Well, I mean something transcendent and divine, supernatural, that can't be killed, omniscient, all-powerful. Okay, well, what about a Norse god? Because those sometimes can be killed by titans or by, I think, rare cases, humans. They can experience pain and suffering. They're not omniscient. They're not all-powerful. So your rejection of God as an atheist doesn't automatically reject these because they don't meet your criteria of a God. So you could still potentially, as this particular atheist, believe in the Norse gods because they're not omniscient or all-powerful or omnibenevolent. So that's actually a good point.
The belief in, then you can't reject the belief in it. That's the implication of your claim.
I didn't say that I rejected the belief in Lona. I said I didn't know who Lono was. I didn't say anything about rejecting.
That's because I've asked you several times and you haven't. But let me get to my even greater point. Mm-hmm. You're saying atheists don't understand what religion is or what God is in order to be able to reject it fully or completely. We have someone over here who studied it in their own way. I've studied religion. I have a degree in religious studies.
You just need a principle. You need to say, I reject anything that includes X, Y, and Z. You don't have to understand the totality of what something is. It'd be like saying, oh, you're a Christian? That means you reject Islam, right? Oh, well, did you know every particular tiny thing about Islam? No, so how can you reject this part of Islam if you don't know about it? It's like, well, because I can reject the thing as a whole based on foundational principles, like it asserting a unitary God, for it preaching things that go against the Bible. I don't have to know every tiny detail about it to reject it on principle, to reject it as a unified entity, regardless of whether it has particulars.
Specialty in Christianity and Mediterranean traditions. And further than that, beyond me, Pew Research studies suggest that atheists and agnostics actually know more about religion and about religious stories, the foundational principles, than believers.
That's because they're more religious than they think they are.
True. No, that's true. Although I think that's not really true. I don't think atheists are... maybe atheists, but people who are agnostic, no. Agnostics don't give a fuck. They don't know about religion. Their whole position is not giving a fuck. Why would they go learn about religion just to not give a fuck about it? That doesn't make any sense.
Okay. You can...
They're concerned with deep matters. And
I'd also say a lot of that's due to liberalism and the educational system.
One of the defining characteristics of someone who's oriented in a religious direction is that they're concerned with deep...
Also, how do you qualify knowledge about a thing? If you're an atheist, you say, well, I know a lot about religion. Do you understand, like, Christology? Do you understand metaphysics, Christian metaphysics? Do you understand the priesthood, the liturgy? Like, who's qualifying what they understand? Because I guarantee you, if you take any of these, all these atheists know so much about religion, and you send them to, like, an actual priest or bishop or scholar, they're like, yeah, no, you don't. Like who's qualifying what they understand and what they don't? Because at least every single layperson within a religion is going to at least understand the basics of tradition. They're going to understand the liturgy. They're going to understand the psalms and responses. They're going to read the Bible. Even if it's lackluster, all of them are going to have at least some foundational understanding of the religion they're participating in. Whereas atheism, there's absolutely zero guarantee for them to know anything about the particular religion. Atheists might know about other religions, but it's not my responsibility really as a Christian to know everything about Islam. I think it's good to learn about these religions, but it's not necessary as a Christian. Because you can reject the thing as a whole without knowing all of its particulars. I can reject it on the basis of its assertion in a unitary God with one nature, one person. Right? So who's qualifying that? That'd be my question.
Deep matters.
Okay.
In fact, it's virtually definitional.
Right, but they also have to identify with
And I would argue that they don't have any basis on which to qualify that. They don't have any authority or epistemological foundation to assert that atheists know more about religion. Like who's constructing that question bank? Probably some atheist, liberal, academic person. You know what I mean?
The religious tradition and accept the foundational stories that go along with that.
Well, that would mean more that they're sectarian than that they're religious. And most people, for example, in the United States, deny that they're religious, but accept that they're spiritual.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Most spiritual. These ugly individuals.
Aha!
Oh, this guy.
Hi, nice to meet you.
How are you doing?
Good, how
What's
are you?
your name?
I'm Greg. Nice to meet
Hi,
you.
Greg.
Okay,
This guy looks ugly already.
I feel like...
No, wait, I've seen this guy already. He's already gotten another video. He was the journalist with the pen and paper who cites Pew Research and makes fun of Christians. Yeah, so these guys are all plants. These guys are repeat offenders. And they just keep bringing the same people on. So this is like a cast of individuals.
You're getting at this idea of polysemy, where we have multiple related meanings for a word, right? Like, for example...
polysemy, like word concept fallacy, like we use the same word, but we have different conceptions of it.
A famous painting can be emotionally moving in that it changes my emotional state.
This guy has no chin.
And when I was on the highway coming here to the studio, I was physically
moving.
I was changing my position. Meanings for a word, right? Like, for example, a famous painting and position. on the highway coming.
This guy looks like he's watching his girlfriend like fuck another dude. This guy's sitting in the cuck chair. Look at this stupid hair, bro. I feel like I've seen this hair before. It looks right stupid. It's like way too short. It makes his face look really long. He looks really sad. He's got this goofy Hawaiian shirt. None of these people have biceps. None of these people have ever curled more than 20 pounds. Like, what the fuck is this?
Here to the studio, I was physically moving. I was changing my position. If I said, I believe the Mona Lisa is very moving, and you said, you don't really understand what you're saying, it's nailed to the wall, I would say that you're the one who...
Yeah, that's a word concept fallacy. Yep. So you're saying moving, moving referring to emotional moving versus moving as to physical moving, right? So, okay, it's just a linguistic error.
Doesn't understand what I'm saying, not the other way around. And the way that relates to this is there are many concepts of God, and I'll admit I find a lot of what you say about that.
Well, I would actually destroy the entire debate by saying this: there is no unitary definition for God. It doesn't exist. No, the religions, it assumes that all the religions are appealing to the same God or referencing that the word God has the same referent whenever it's used by the various religions. They're not appealing to the same being. When I say God as a Jew or I say God as a Muslim, we're not talking about the same being. We're talking about two different beings. Because one's a unitary being, another one's a trinity, right? If you reject Jesus and Jesus is God, then you're rejecting God. At least the Christian conception of God, right? So I would reject the idea that there is a unitary referent for the word God. There isn't. The word God as some unitary thing that binds all the religions and their understandings of quote-unquote God is a fallacy. It doesn't make sense. It's framing the thing improperly.
That interesting. I'm familiar with it. The idea of...
So really, I would break it down by religion. I'd say, what about the Jewish God, the Christian God? I would break it down that way because there is no one God between all three of them or between all the religions.
This kind of Jungian hierarchical thing, or as a metaphor or a symbol, or the kind of, atheist, materialist...
Well, he's actually... No, this guy's right. He's basically saying you, Jordan Peterson, are projecting your subjective Jungian interpretation onto God, but what makes your definition of God authoritative over mine? Oh, wait, none. Absolutely none.
Pluralist idea of a agentic, omnipotent, omniscient being that intervenes in reality, right? So when I'm saying that I reject the concept of...
But no, you can't even do that. You can't say that because that would encapsulate three different beings. So it wouldn't be one being, one God. You would have a set of beings which would be categorized or defined by that definition, right? So like, let's say, well, I'm going to define God as a unitary, omniscient, omnipotent, all-powerful, transcendent being. Okay, but that's still wrong. The reason being because it assumes that like the Judeo God, the Islamic God, and the Christian God are all referring to this reductivist definition that you've created, where it's not. They're actually referring to three different beings. That's kind of the fallacy. That's kind of the problem. Let me think about this. No, I think that's correct, yeah. Because even if you make some kind of perennialist, reductivist, lowest common denominator definition for God, it doesn't reduce God to one being. You've simply made a set with lowest common denominator definitions that allow the permission of three beings to enter that set. That's all you've done.
God, I'm aware of these other definitions of God, but I think that when we use words, we tend to only imply one meaning at a time. So the same way that I would say the Mona Lisa is moving emotionally, but I would not say it's moving physically. I would say I reject the concept of God in this very literal way. But
what literal way?
The way that God is this omniscient, omnipotent, agentic, supernatural being that sent his son down and has, caused miracles and all these things like that. The idea of...
Well, that's not universal. I mean, you included Jesus. That's a Christian God. So now you've limited it to the Christian God, right? Whereas before, I thought you were now you reject only the Christian God. What about Islamic God? Have you rejected him? Because you've narrowed your definition of exclusion down to the Christian God. That means you've now opened up the possibility for the Judeo God or the pagan God or the Islamic God. Now those are still possible within your worldview because you've only specifically rejected a God who sent down his son. That's the Christian God.
God is
Do you think that there's an underlying unity of things?
Could you
that doesn't matter.
Explain that question?
No, but this is a fallacy anyway. The existence of a lowest common denominator between religions doesn't create unity or doesn't create truth. Truth is not derived from some kind of lowest common denominator commonality between religions. Nor does it create some kind of unified definition for God as a single being. So it's still faulty.
Well, scientists, for example, believe that science unifies in a comprehensive theory. Do you, yes, no, or that there are multiple competing...
Wait, no, it doesn't. It actually doesn't. Science does not unify. It actually, not at all. Not really. It's not the point of science, not necessarily. Because there's a multitude of scientific understandings or theories around a thing, right? That are all valid science, right? So no.
Competing truths. Those are the options. Either things unify or there are multiple competing truths.
I know that, for example,
Well, it wouldn't be multiple competing truths. It would be multiple competing perspectives or paradigms, not truths. They couldn't all be true if they're making exclusive claims.
Physics, people are looking for a theory of everything.
And why do you think they're doing that?
It's interesting, it's helpful.
But they also believe that there's an underlying unity to things.
In a sense, yeah, the material...
But it doesn't matter what people believe. It doesn't matter. It's a fallacy.
The world and time and space are probably governed by universal laws and principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to...
Wait, so God is just a construction of imagination and value? Is that what he's implying? God is literally a construction of the human imagination across history? It's pretty mentally retarded.
Do the prompt?
Well, I'm trying to define God, the God that I don't think atheists do a very good job of defining. Here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Can we go...
So, epistemology? Or is it motivation? He's talking about the motivation.
Go back. Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable with the question.
No, I feel like you're just kind of throwing different spaghetti at the wall.
I'm not.
That's true. That's so true. Of course, the fat guy talks about spaghetti at a wall. Of course, right? Of course, the fat guy uses a food analogy, but all right, that's pretty funny.
Okay.
I asked you a very specific question. What is it that you think guides you when you're talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true?
Logic, memory.
Guides you in your...
I actually didn't understand Peterson does spaghetti a lot. That's most of what he does is like verbal spaghetti because he has no principles.
Partly that, yes, yes, but that the same thing might extend to a broader domain that would include imagination and value.
Could you help me connect that to the prompt?
But here's another question for you. What do you think guides you in your determination of whether or not what you're saying to me is true?
Basically, what guides you to feel determined about the trueness of what you're saying? Basically, what guides your conviction, your self-conviction? What makes you certain? Your reasoning faculty. My reasoning faculty tells me that what I've landed upon is true. My moral conscience, my nature as a human being, and created in the image of God, to prefer the true over the false. Right? So I think that's the question. He's saying what makes you so assured, or what motivates your self-conviction? It's a weird question.
Can we go back? Can we stay on what we were talking about?
We are.
Okay.
You're just uncomfortable talking to me to help you determine whether what you say is true.
Logic, memory, reasoning, sensory information.
How do you distinguish that from being governed by something that's false?
It's an interesting question.
How do you know the difference when you speak between what's true and what's false? So
Okay, so I mean, all Peterson is doing is he's presenting a critique of the atheist system, which is that how do you know? He's basically asking epistemology. How are you certain about truth? Because what if your senses lie to you? There you go. What if your sense data you're getting is faulty? What if the reasoning faculty you think you have is just a construction of your evolution aimed at survival, not at truth? How could you trust it? And this is a good atheist critique. This is fine. I mean, the same would appeal to you, Peterson, so I don't know what your answer to this would be. But yeah, I agree. This is a valid attack on atheism. They don't have any kind of epistemological account or justification for how they can know things, right? Especially if it's a materialism where we're just evolutionary creatures aimed at survival, then why the fuck would we have a faculty that operates on truth? Especially when the truth is often inconvenient and costs lives. It gets people killed.
well, you could imagine
Right? I can infer.
From what principles?
So, and what are you getting at?
I'm getting at the fact that your conscience guides you. Is that reasonable?
Yeah, but where do you get a conscience?
Conscious is defined by
Conscience.
my empathy and my reason are my foundational.
Define it any way you want.
Okay, so that's how I'm defining my conscience. Is my conscience is my sense of
Right
and
and
wrong. Yeah, exactly.
Yes.
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
does that come from?
I would say that comes from an evolved capacity to empathize and a recognition of the benefits of engaging with and nurturing that capacity, and then that empathy is.
Nope, this is wrong. Wrong. This doesn't answer the fundamental question, which is because it presupposes if you're just going to give an account of where your reasoning faculty, well, it comes from the evolutionary ability to navigate the world, and if you're just going to give an evolutionary account of the history of where humans got their reasoning faculty, that's not enough, because ultimately you still can't be certain of whether or not if it's telling you the truth. So you haven't answered the more fundamental question, which is how do we know it's purporting the truth? Right? Because let's say you're conducting this reasoning right now. What if that's faulty? What if that is based on a brain which arrived at its current state randomly, not oriented around truth? It has no telos. Right? That's kind of the problem we're getting at.
Constrained and guided by reason, right? Like, for example, I am driving down the highway, there's a kitten in the road, I'm going to empathetically feel, oh my God, I want to save the kitten, but then reasonably, like, I'm going to get hit by a car, right? So that's sort of the process through which I make ethical decisions.
Okay,
is
how do
empathy
you,
constrained by reason.
Do you think that people can differ
That's not really, no, that doesn't answer the question, though, and we'll get into it later.
in their response to something empathically?
Yeah.
Is there a mediating principle that
It's basically, okay, let's say you have empathy. How do you trust empathy? How do you trust that empathy is not just some arbitrary construct solely for human social cooperation? How does that ground it as a effective, true tool for your conscience? It doesn't. That's just describing what it is, or that's just describing its history.
can tell you one person who's empathic and another person who's empathic that disagree who's correct?
True. There you go. That's actually a good point.
Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that's where we'd have to, talk it out, right? Mm-hmm. We do that in real life all the time when we have, whether that's a discussion with a friend about the right thing to do in a situation.
But yeah, even then, there's still ways for this atheist to weasel out of it.
And whether that's
because Peterson isn't really using the correct language. He should be stepping into the philosophical language, which is epistemology. That's where he needs to really go, but he won't because he has no principles to stand on either.
Policy discussion about law, right? That's where we can converse with each other, think about things, explain our perspectives, and then kind of reach a conclusion, right? That I think that we do that all the time.
So Elijah, the prophet Elijah, defined God in the Old Testament as the voice.
But that's not even a thing, because even in the Christian paradigm where we have conscience guided by, God's image and whatnot, people still arrive at disagreements. So that doesn't undermine our epistemological foundation simply because there's disagreements. That would be an inverse appeal to consensus. You're saying, well, your system is faulty because sometimes people disagree. Well, so what? Doesn't matter. You talk it out, or disagreements are okay, right?
Voice of conscience within.
Okay.
That's a definition.
So you're saying by that definition of God, I see this kind of goes back to where I'm saying initially.
I'm not defining it. Elijah
Okay,
defined
so
it.
as Elijah defines
It's
God.
defined that way in Jonah too.
Okay, so as
Cardinal Newman also
got
defined it that
as,
way.
as I'm sure you know many people who've defined it that way, and it's impressive. You're a very knowledgeable person.
I'm not trying to be impressive. I'm
okay.
just pointing out to you
Got
how
it.
God is defined in the Old Testament.
Jordan Peterson does this like old man schooling technique. It's just it's very performative. It's very like self-aggrandizing. It's just annoying. He's trying to sound like the wise, smart old man, and he's kind of right. He's kind of like, okay, you know a lot about the Bible, Jesus. Can we get back to the argument at hand? But this guy keeps like waxing himself, and he won't let the guy make his point.
Testament.
All right. So to respond to that, I do think there are lots of interesting ways to define God. And that goes back to my kind of opening
Then how
statement.
do we specify what we're arguing about?
We use context clues, or again, it goes back to my example of the Mona
I'm
Lisa.
defining God as
That's a good point. If there's multiple interpretations of God, which God are you rejecting as an atheist? That's ultimately what these goobers took 20 minutes to arrive at.
conscience.
Okay, so that's interesting, but then you're kind of expanding the meaning of
No,
God.
I'm not. That's how it's defined in the Old Testament.
Okay,
in
so-
Elijah and in Jonah.
Sure, so whoever, so some...
It's not whoever.
Okay.
Elijah is one of the
Okay,
major
all right,
Old Testament
all right,
prophets.
all
Right?
right.
He's equal in stature to Moses.
Okay.
This guy's just, well, it's not nothing, okay? Like, my grandmother loved this vase. It was her favorite vase for 20 years. You're gonna respect it. And it's just like, okay, dude, shut up. I mean, I kind of want to see this play out, but it's almost been over an hour. I think we'll just let it go.
Right. So it's not arbitrary.
All right, so
All these guys look really weird.
is interesting, but it's not relevant to the context with which I am using the term God.
It's directly relevant. Atheists reject God, but they don't understand what they're rejecting. You accept conscience as a guide, and conscience is one of the defining characteristics of God in the Old Testament.
I think you're being intellectually disingenuous.
No, the guy's actually right. It's actually not really relevant because the atheist is not... He's not arguing against Moses' definition of God, right? Or Elijah's. Like, on what grounds are those authoritative sources amongst atheists? They would be authoritative sources among Christians, but to an atheist, they're actually not relevant. So that's actually correct.
In what way?
Because, again...
I asked you if you believe that conscience guided you.
You just asked me a question, and then you stopped me from answering it. In this setting, you understand the way I am using the term God and belief.
Not in the least. I don't understand how you're using it in the least. That's why I'm trying to define it. My definition of God as conscience is a lot more precise and oriented than your definition of the God that you hypothetically disbelieve in.
It's irrelevant to the fault lines of this debate.
How is it irrelevant?
Because in common parlance, when we're talking about atheists, God, belief, not belief,
I
we're
don't
not
care
talking...
about common parlance. I'm trying to get to something fundamental.
I think your point is irrelevant to the way that people tend to use these words. Your point that there are these polysemous
I didn't make
ideas
that
of God.
point. You did.
I
made a specific point that God was associated with conscience.
I just feel like you kind of retreat into this semantic fog.
I'm not retreating at all.
He does do that. He actually does. That's so true. He retreats into semantic fog. I like that. That's a really good point. That's actually a good... I got to give it to that guy. That's actually a good framing of Peterson. That's exactly what he does. He's retreating into the semantic fog. Well, what is God? Well, Moses. Well, who cares about Moses? That's what he's saying. Who cares about Moses? Shut up. I'm not defining God according to Moses, right? And that's irrelevant. So you're waxing and grandstanding on, oh, Moses and Elijah and the book of Jonah. It's like, okay, dude, but that's not the definition I'm using. That's not relevant to the argument I'm making, which he's actually right. And that's what Peterson does all the time, is he does these, like, it's so true, the semantic fog. Like, anytime he gets questioned on God, he's just like, well, what is God? What is Jesus? What is the Bible? Who am I? What are you? What does it mean that words have meaning? What is language? What is a proposition? What is an adjective? It is so true. It's so true. As soon as Peterson gets questioned on these things, he retreats into like obfuscating and blowing up the language of the question.
Well, I'm advancing, sir. You are...
Like, here's how I would pin Jordan Peterson on God. Hey, Jordan Peterson, do you believe in God? What does God mean? And he, like, points his fingers and, like, does this big dramatic thing. What does God mean? There's no... You don't understand the first thing about God, and if you think you do, boy, well, oh, it's coming to you. It's some, like, boomer rhetoric. It's like the Christian God with all of the metaphysics. How about the Nicene Creed? Do you affirm the Nicene Creed? Yes or no? I believe in God. One holy, true... Let me find that shit, bro. I haven't recited the Nicene Creed. Begotten, not made. One God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, all things visible and invisible, and one Lord Jesus Christ, the Holy Son of God, begotten from the Father, begotten, not made. Oh, it's a Christian Reformed church. Fuck me. Fuck me. All right, let's get back on track.
Retreating.
All right. Well, it was very nice to meet you.
Nice
I appreciate
to meet
the
you too.
conversation.
Yeah. It's very brave of you to do this.
Thank you.
Is he drinking sparkling water? Is he drinking a Fitzer? What are those sparkling water called? Sparkling water is gay. It just tells me you touch kids. I don't trust anyone who drinks sparkling water. LaCroix? No, it's not LaCroix. What is it? Damn it, what is it? It's this Perrier. All right, another soylent soy boy. Well, let's do it. But let's reflect. They're actually making good points. They're actually doing better than I thought. They're actually not doing horribly.
Surrounded is now a podcast, available wherever you listen.
Within science. Morality and purpose cannot be found within science.
True. Let me summarize the argument. Is ought. Can you get an is from an ought? No, you cannot. Therefore, describing... Well, evolution, you see, we evolved our moral functions to cooperate as social creatures within the social order as human beings so we can get along with each other in a tribe. That's an is. That does not describe oughts, which are morals. Morals deals with oughts. It's the black guy.
What is up, Mr. Canada?
How you doing, man?
I'm doing great.
What's
How are
your
you?
name?
Brian.
Mr.
I think it's
Canada.
interesting that you say that morality and purpose can't be found in science. Actually,
No, within science.
sure.
Yeah.
Purpose, I actually grant you, because purpose is subjective, right? Unless you want to boil it
Purpose is subjective, yeah. I like how he just says that, like he just definitively, purpose is subjective, man. Everybody knows this.
down
It's
to
completely subjective. I can go rape kids. That's my subjective purpose in life, is to touch as many children in the booty hole as possible. That is my sole subjective purpose in life, you know? That's it. It's to slaughter as many children as I can, bro. That's my subjective purpose. It's whatever I want.
the purpose of life is just to procreate, right? Sure,
Or are there rules?
whatever. Morality is actually something that we do see. We actually have examples of Neanderthals, an older individual was found in a tribe,
This is really
missing an
loud.
arm, missing teeth, still alive, somehow in his 40s, 50s, right? Typically,
these stupid atheists.
you're a Neanderthal, you can't eat, you can't hunt, you die, right?
Let me make this as very clear as possible. Describing where humans describing a story or a theory on how humans evolved their empathetic faculties or social faculties or the quote-unquote conscience, an atheistic, evolutionary, materialist conscience, describing where that comes from does not justify it when we conduct debate or do language. Because why should I adhere to this evolutionary tool I've been given by evolution? I have impulses which come from my biology, which come from evolution, but why ought I act on those evolutionary, moral, ethical impulses? Why? What actual reason can you give me to follow through with those? Why ought I accept and act on these impulses within my evolution? Can you give me a reason? Simply telling me a story of where they came from does not validate them or it does not create a justification for these moral oughts. It only describes their origin, which is actually a fallacy, a genetic fallacy, by saying, well, this comes from this, therefore that's justified. No, that's a fallacy, genetic fallacy. And I'm trying to articulate it as clearly as I can. But like, let's say I have a moral prescription, you ought not to kill. Okay? And then I say, what justifies this moral ought of I ought not kill? Well, you have this moral faculty that evolved so that humans could get along with each other and survive, and it's just an evolved thing. Okay, why ought I care about that? Why ought I accept or follow through with my evolutionary programming? Why don't I just kill? Why do I have to listen to my evolutionary programming? Because if you don't, then you'll die. Well, what if I don't care? Why ought I care about whether or not I die? Like, think about it this way. If the human psyche and all of its components simply evolved for survival, then why ought I care about survival? There's no reason to actually care about survival, because survival just is. Like, so the things that survived just survived because they did, arbitrarily. There's no reason that they needed to survive, or there was no purpose, there was no telos. They only survived because they were good at surviving. And if that's the case, and we're just a product of competition, evolutionary competition and survival, then it's arbitrary. And there is no moral ought behind the things we do. It's merely a tool to help us compete with other creatures and survive in this world, which is arbitrary. Why ought I survive? Why ought I care about survival? There is no reason. It was arbitrary. It was just humans happened to evolve this system arbitrarily without any purpose or direction so that they could survive. Well, why do I need to care about survival? Right? That's the more fundamental question. Why do I need to care about survival? Well, because you'll feel pain or you'll die. Why do I need to care about death? Well, doesn't everyone care about life and death? Well, that's the thing in question. So you're not allowed to say that. You're not allowed to just go, well, you don't want to die, do you? What if I do? What if I don't care about that? What if I don't see the underlying, oh, well, this is a thing that keeps humans alive and functional in a species. What if I don't care about that? So what? I don't care. That's the thing I'm bringing into question is, what if I want to challenge the survivalist reason or foundation for my ethics and morals, and I'm questioning that as well? What if I don't care? Simply describing a story for how our evolutionary faculties of empathy and morality, our conscience, describing where they came from, doesn't tell me or justify moral principles as why I ought or not do something. It's hard to explain, but it's basically like, if everything we have comes from survival, why ought I care about survival? Do I have to? Do I have to care about pain? What if I like pain? What if I don't really care too much about pain? What if there's something that is more important to me that transcends the pain? Why do I have to care about pain? Why do I have to care about death? What if I'm dying for a noble cause? So universally, these things aren't absolutes. And if that's the case, then what is my moral absolutes, and what justifies those and acts as a backbone for my moral decisions? Because if it's okay to sacrifice my life for something noble, or sacrifice pain and suffering for something noble, or even sacrifice another person for some kind of greater goal, like in an army, you're fighting a holy war, you can sacrifice your soldiers for this war, right? If that's the case, then what if this and every particular moral decision I'm making, you can't really appeal to, well, survival or competition or whatever, because you admit that it's okay to go against those things sometimes if it's for a higher purpose. Well, what if every particular decision I make appeals to that same higher purpose and is therefore permitted to overwrite the rules of general normative morality of like well-being, survival, etc.? Basically, if we have instances where it's morally acceptable to go against traditional normative rules of evolutionary survival, then normative evolutionary survival vague principles aren't the ultimatum. They aren't the ultimate. They can't be the ultimate good. So then the question is, what is? Where do we justify and get the basis for our moral oughts? Simply describing them as evolutionary processes doesn't mean I have to care about that. I don't have to care or affirm or accept, or it doesn't justify any of our morals. And it's hard to explain, so I know I've been rambling for a bit, but even me and my understanding, I'm trying to learn to articulate myself better. So I'm trying to articulate it as well as I can.
Right, but we know that members of his tribe were taking care of him, right? So we know that at some level, early in our evolutionary history, we actually developed altruism. We have examples of chimpanzees who actually have a basic understanding of fairness, right? If you give a chimpanzee 2 grapes, right, and his buddy gets 3, right? He actually freaks out, right? But you give both chimps 3 grapes and they're good. We have examples of parrots.
Except for the greedy chimps.
Except for the greedy chimps.
They want 4 grapes.
They want 4 grapes. You know, those do exist, right? But we have similar examples where we do animal tests, right? And
so morality is intrinsic.
I think.
So it precedes science.
I think that actually
right?
a better way to define it would be that social animals, which we are, right, require some level of morality or.
Into what? I'm not disagreeing.
Well, there's a problem with this question. But the question is basically, is morality some phenomenon? Is it a descriptive phenomenon, or is it a... Because there seems to be a category error. Morality deals with prescriptions, oughts. Science is a series of descriptions, is. And as we learned from, I think it was Descartes, was it Hume? I want to say Descartes. Fuck, it was Hume. The is-ought problem, you can't get from an is to an ought, or vice versa. They're distinct categories. They're exclusive categories. So if science only deals with what is, it can't tell us what we ought to do.
Sure.
Why do they require that?
Because it's the only way that...
Because let's say this. Because really what the evolutionist is saying is the reason you ought to share and be moral, it's because that's what helps creatures survive. Okay, why do I ought to care about what? Why ought I care about survival? Why ought I care about what generally helps creatures survive? Right? Oh, well, because that leads to this. Why ought I care about the thing that leads to this, right? See how the question, you can always just go back a step. You can always say, well, you need to care about altruism because altruism is what helps species survive. Okay, why do I got to care about the survival of the species? What if I am questioning that? What's the justification for that? Because it seems to be, within science, just arbitrary. It seems like this just happens to be on this planet, and in this circumstance, and amongst all the other competing species, this is the thing that just happens to be competitive, is altruism. Or this balance of altruism and selfishness. So it seems to be arbitrary. Driven by a random complex plethora of evolutionist system, right? Just random shit playing together, and the strongest survive. So this just happens to be the thing that helped us survive. There's no grand purpose like driving evolution other than just arbitrary survival.
Social groups can actually survive, right?
That's my point with regards to science. Thank you very much.
Is that?
Precisely the point that you just made, that science has to exist within a moral framework that isn't in itself scientific.
How's that not scientific?
Well, because it's not derived from the scientific process, as you just indicated.
It doesn't need to derive from the scientific process. It's the fact that we are social animals, and we need that to exist as a group.
I
right?
agree, but you pointed to the morality of Neanderthals, to the morality of chimpanzees. They didn't derive that from science.
They don't need to. That's not how that works.
That's my point.
Science explains it. So
no, science doesn't explain morality.
It doesn't explain how social animals would need to be
Well, that's a complicated question.
But we see it, though.
Yeah, but explaining the evolution of morality and explaining morality itself aren't the same thing.
Okay.
I mean, Peterson's right, but he's not articulating it very well. I mean, neither am I. I'm kind of shit.
So you're asking why does this happen?
Yes, that's more accurate.
Because we're social animals and we
yeah,
need
but there's
to be...
more to it than that.
Is there?
Sure. For example, so we're moral animals that have a sense of the future.
Sure.
Okay, that makes us unique, and that structures our morality.
No, actually.
Well, okay. You could give an evolutionary story or theory or descriptive account of where humans get morality. That doesn't actually justify morality in of itself. So you actually can find morality within science. You just can't justify it. That's all.
There are other animals that can predict the future. Or
Not
predict
really.
the future. No, tigers. Actually, there was a tiger at the SF Zoo that killed somebody. And so
Hunting
actually...
animals...
No. Kids threw shit at the tiger. The tiger actually plotted its escape, and it found the kids.
I'm not saying that animals can't think.
Okay.
No, but they can
pause here.
perceive the future. That's what I'm saying.
Well-
Voted out by the majority.
Thank you, man.
Good man. Yeah.
You guys look great gay.
Hey, Jordan Peterson. How you doing?
How you doing, man?
My name's Luke. Nice to meet
Good
you.
to see you, Luke.
So your claim that morality and purpose can only be found in
still
science
fat.
is a little shaky because I
It's
think
like fat transgender dude. Looks like a girl. He looks a ton like a girl. He's probably taking estrogen.
that your claim is really being
Or
framed
is a
to be
girl.
morality and purpose can only be found in religion. Is that how you're kind of framing it?
I would say that the domain of religion is the domain of morality and purpose. Yes,
Okay.
exactly. And also
Well, it's not all it is, but that's one of the things it covers.
that science is actually structured, at least in part technically, to eliminate such considerations from its purview a priori.
Okay.
Right? That's why we define science as...
Well, the problem is science deals with empirical phenomenon. So it can't give a justification or account for moral oughts. It can describe how humans engage in altruism, which is not the same thing as actually structuring, grounding, or justifying our morals. To do that, you would have to say, well, we're made in the image of God. God has inscribed us in his nature with a specific conscience, and we have a specific telos, which is to bring glory to God, not to sin, to conduct his will, and it's something prescribed upon us by God and by our nature as creatures of God. That's how you do that. You wouldn't appeal to science. You wouldn't say, well, we're evolutionary animals. Because the question is like, well, why care about survival? If these things just arbitrarily came about because they're the things that would just happen to help humans survive, why do we need to care about survival then? Right?
is value free. But that has to be wrong because scientists have to prioritize their attention towards something before they can even engage in observation.
Okay.
And that act of prioritization of attention is a value predicated act.
Well, he's right. Yep. No, he's right. He's basically saying science makes value judgments all the time. And I mean, there's a even more foundational value judgment where you're prioritizing the true over the false. That's a value judgment. Because science purports, quote unquote, the truth, apparently, what is, and the valuing and the choosing of the true over the false to purport is a value judgment. And you're actually seeing this value judgment diminish and begin to erode within the scientific institution as people become more Marxist and communist and liberal. They say, and I've had a friend personally, a communist dude, tell me this. I personally sent him a video on race realism. I'm like, hey, look at this. And he didn't even disagree with the facts in it. He wasn't like, oh, let me bring up some counter science. He was just like, this information would only be used by a racist. Therefore, I'm going to reject it. And what he's implying is that even if it was true, I don't prioritize the true over the false. I prioritize not being racist or seen as racist, or my conception of what racist supposedly means. So you're seeing today that, well, actually, we can't do science because science cares more about offending people than it does pursuing truth over falsehood. And so he's actually right that science actually, in its proper function, healthily functioning, requires a value judgment of the true over the false. So he's correct.
And so we as I can continue. There's all sorts of things we have to assume about science before it can take place.
Okay, so what I'm specifically pointing out here is about religion in particular, since you yourself are a Christian, right?
People debate about that, and I generally don't discuss it publicly.
Okay, I understand that. And me, myself, I am a former young earth creationist fundamentalist.
Oh, yeah.
So I have experience in this. I used to run a TikTok channel directed about apologetics about the Bible, specifically in this type of facet with morality.
I kind of have a little bit of respect for the young earth people, or the creationists. I mean, it's like the geocentrists. I'm like, yeah, like, right on, like, sure. Like, they're just willing to say, yeah, fuck all the science. Earth is fucking tiny and it's flat. I'm like, right on, man. Okay. Like, hey, they're going hardcore with the biblical shit. I'm like, fine.
Evolution and such, and going back and forth with that. So in the Bible, it talks a lot about slavery, right?
Yes.
I love slavery.
Yes. So in that, it teaches you how to take care of a slave, rather than saying...
I've already answered this, but I'll paraphrase quickly. The reason the Bible doesn't condemn particular institutions or particular political arrangements or societal norms is because those are human inventions, and God is looking at the heart. He's transcending human circumstance, and he's looking at the heart, and he's making commandments around the human heart, not particular political systems. God isn't going to say, hey, vote Democrat, hey, vote Republican, because it's the moral thing to do. Instead, he looks at the heart and he says, whatever circumstance you're in, do what's right within that circumstance. And the circumstance of the times was slavery. So God wasn't going to say, hey, slavery is just universally immoral. He was saying, if you're going to exist within a system that does slavery, at least do it in a way that is moral, which is conduct yourself and conduct your slavery well, treat your slaves well, don't abuse them, don't overwork them, respect them, etc. Because whether or not we can be kind or moral to one another transcends the particular circumstance that we're in. I mean, sometimes there can be circumstances where there's a political system or some kind of human system that is directly antithetical towards God. Like if the state is just like, you have to pray to Baal, it's like, okay, well, don't do that. But I am also of the personal belief that there's nothing necessarily evil about slavery in of itself. What most people really get outraged when they whine about slavery is they're imagining slaves getting beaten, mistreated, and like abused, and that's really where the outrage is coming from. Most people don't really get into the nuances of whether or not slavery itself, the system of like owning another person or like forced labor, is wrong in of itself. Like most people don't get into that. And if they do, well, as an atheist, most people who debate this are like liberal atheists, you don't really have any foundation on which to say slavery is right or wrong other than a guttural emotional reaction, which I find ironic because that was the same critique they used against people who disliked homosexuals. They said, well, you're just going to judge them based on some guttural emotional reaction that you can't justify. And that's how they, legalize homosexuality. But when it comes to slavery, well, they're just going to get outraged. But on what basis, right? So I think when people misunderstand slavery, they misunderstand the mind of God. And God is looking at things across all of time and all of history. And so for him to avoid contradicting himself or limiting his prescriptions to a particular time and an age, God is timeless. His advice is timeless. So to remain timeless and true across all time, he doesn't make claims about particular systems. Instead, he tells humans how to conduct themselves with a morally pure heart, which is to treat your slaves well or not abuse them, not overwork them, and certain rules around that. Instead of getting on your high horse and being like, oh, slavery is always evil. Because ultimately slavery is a human system that in of itself doesn't necessarily contain a moral or immoral axis to it. It's just a system. Like same with capitalism. God isn't going to say capitalism is always evil because evil, greedy capitalists are promoting evil Jewry. Like no, like God is going to say there's going to be a way to do capitalism well, give to Caesar's what is Caesar's. Like, play by the moral rules, act morally within the system you're participating in, and then we could have a morally fruitious, a morally righteous capitalist system. We could also have a morally righteous communist system. The morality of the individual transcends the political or systemic social circumstance.
Slavery is wrong. I think
no,
it should
says
say
that in the story of Moses.
It says slavery is incorrect. It says it's immoral.
That's why Moses leads his people away from slavery.
But why does the Bible
No, I don't think that was why.
predicate and tell people exactly how to take care of a slave? Isn't that immoral? Wouldn't you say that culturally we've evolved as a species, as he said earlier about empathy?
Yeah, I would say that the reason we evolved, so to speak, away from slavery was because the West was founded on Judeo-Christian morality and the presumption that every person was made in the image of God. And so slavery itself became immoral, and that was established by Protestant Christians in the UK.
But I would disagree. I think that's a human invention. There's nowhere in the Bible that says slavery is inherently wrong. So if you were truly a Christian, you were Judeo-Christian values, there's actually nothing that explicitly condemns slavery. So if you were authentically adherent to the Christian texts, there would be no actual basis on which to universally condemn the system of slavery within itself. So I think most of them are actually inconsistent. And I would say that Christians are loving, kind people, and then they naturally, by maybe no ill will on their own, but they just naturally assume that, well, slavery involves abuse and it's evil, and they just kind of connected the dots on their behalf, but it wasn't a prescription by God. It was just humans and Christians with a certain ethos and attitude going, well, this thing tends to perpetrate a lot of harm and evil, so we're going to get rid of it. And it's like, yeah, if you can't do slavery without respecting your slaves or conducting things humanely, then maybe you should get rid of slavery, right?
Who then convinced the UK government for 200 years to go to war on slavery. And
wouldn't you say that this is about the cultural evolution of humans in general, rather than just...
But that's a good point. So I would say that the damnation or condemnation of slavery is a proof of a human evolution within their morals. But that's not really where I would say we would get our morals. We get it from God. So yes, humans can subjectively, culturally, socially change and evolve their perspective on morals, but that's not the grounding I would use for morals. And that is actually a good argument against someone like Peterson. Because if we can change our morals whenever we want, then what justifies or grounds our morals? And he can't say God because he doesn't believe in God. So then this is actually a good critique from this guy.
No, I think it's the flowering of the ideas that were embedded in the biblical texts across long spans of time.
I feel like this is just humans.
No, but that's still subjective then. That's the flowering or evolving. No. That's humans. That's humans projecting. Yeah, maybe it has involvement with the Old Testament, but ultimately it's humans who are implementing the morality. So it's still subjective.
It's editing based on the cultural evolution of morality.
What do you mean by just?
Just?
Yeah, just humans.
Well, humans.
Editing.
Well, based on culture and history, right? We get better.
Well, they did do it based on culture and history, but culture and history have their foundations too. So.
Well, yeah, but we're talking about slavery. So many people bolstered it based on the Bible. Based on the Bible. They looked at it and they justified it.
That's true. No, that he's right.
In the United States, in the Deep South, they justified slavery.
Yeah, but
based
the main thrust of Protestant thought.
Right, and I would defend them. I'd say, yeah, they're right. Now, that doesn't mean you can abuse your slaves, and if I had to choose between a bunch of abused slaves or no slavery, I would probably get rid of slavery for the greater good. But at the same time, I would also be able to recognize that slavery in of itself isn't always universally evil. It's just we're not able to do it right now because humans tend towards abuse when they have power over an individual like that.
In particular was stringently against slavery, and it was about the only movement in the history of the human race that had an anti-slavery direction.
Which was driven by humans and their understanding
that's one
of
way
morality.
Of looking at, well, it depends.
It's the same with women's suffrage. I mean, women's...
Well, I agree. Women's suffrage is a human evolution. It's not grounded in the normal things I would use to justify morals. So I would say that women's suffrage is not morally justified. It's a human invention. You're right. So is slavery.
What do you mean it was driven by humans? Humans drove slavery too.
Yes, exactly.
So there's no argument there. If slavery and anti-slavery were both driven by humans, what does your claim that they were driven by humans have to do with it?
Evolving morality based on...
Well, no, it's actually a good point. He's saying that the things that we call universal morals really are just human evolutions, which is a product of science. That's what he's saying.
The culture that within the society that they live.
Okay, fine.
So with
I
women's
think that
suffrage
did
as well
happen.
is a very similar topic in the Bible. There are denominations in Christianity, such as Pentecostal movement, which do bolster women to be pastors, right? Which I think that's a great thing to do. But most like to disregard
Where do you
women.
think the idea that human beings were sufficiently equal to all vote and not be slaves came from?
Humans.
Yeah, but so did the idea of slavery.
So did the
that's
idea of God.
fine, but what's your
Yes.
point? Like, you're not making an argument. You're
Wait,
just
what?
saying all
He just said fine. Humans invented God. Fine. Atheist confirmed.
thoughts come from humans,
Yes.
regardless of the thoughts.
It's not driven by a higher power. It's driven on our experiences
Define
as
higher.
humans, which is what is best for all people.
He's so right. He just hides in the semantic fog. Well, define higher. Supernatural, Peterson. Supernatural, not in the natural world, not existing in nature, not a phenomenon, not a thing, not from human consciousness, not a human construction, not an abstract idea or a zeitgeist, product of a zeitgeist. It is a divine, transcendent being, total actuality, with all these the omniscience, omnipotence, etc.
Is it driven by conscience?
It could be, which conscious is also something that has evolved over time. And I think that's
What's
something
the
that does evolve in morality and empathy.
Okay, I don't understand the point that you're making.
My point is that God influenced slavery. People looked at the Bible and went, this is moral because God says so, just like women's suffrage.
There's lots
and
of
just like homosexuality.
All human societies were slave owning, so you
Yes.
can't blame that on the Bible.
If humanity decided...
Oh wait, address that.
Well, okay, but like women's suffrage and slavery is not. I don't care about that. I would agree that that's a moral invention by evolution, by evolving cultures. Fine, but I would also say that that's not where I get my morals. Your argument rests on the fact that people recognize the morality of anti-slavery and women's rights. I don't think there's any moral value to women's rights. So that's kind of the problem. That works on most people because they have an emotional attachment to women having the right to vote. I don't.
That first.
What, about
All
slavery?
human societies.
Like, I don't think women having a right to vote is inherently moral. I don't think slavery is inherently immoral. I think if you abuse and mistreat your slaves, and slavery involves a lot of like you're overworked and you're mistreated and there's abuse, or then yeah, that's immoral. The abuse is immoral, but the system of slavery in of itself isn't immoral.
We're slavers, so you can't blame that on the Bible.
Well, you can say it bolstered it.
Well, not if you look at the broad sweep of history, because it was the Protestant Christians
Based
in
on
the
their
UK.
interpretation.
That doesn't matter though. That doesn't matter because just because some people happen to implement a system and then they also happen to be Christian doesn't make it grounded in Christian religion. Just because Christians happen to secularize and Christians happen to permit homosexuality and permit LGBTQ, and Christian Judeo society happen to permit LGBTQ and permit homosexuality and permit all these degenerate things, it doesn't make it a product of the religion itself. It doesn't mean it's scripturally based. And actually it really comes down to the term Judeo-Christian, because homosexuality isn't supposed to be permitted in a Christian system, but, I'll let you put the other one together.
Of the Bible.
It was the Protestant Christians.
Which evolves over time.
Let's pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
Okay. Well, it was great talking with you.
nice
sir.
He made a good point. That guy really
Peterson.
wanted it.
Good to see you, man.
Pleasure.
What's your name?
Brian. So the first thing I would like to say is I would like
Who's
to
this
engage
ancient
in this
dude here?
discussion in a symbiotic manner. I would not
This
like to
faggot.
engage where there is one clear winner and one clear loser. Emotions are
This faggot.
activated and it ultimately comes about.
That's not how debate works, faggot.
Ego. So I'm just saying I'm really trying to understand your position, and I would just like you to really try to understand my position.
Deal.
Okay, sounds good. With that, if you're saying that morality and purpose cannot come from science, is the opposite of that true, that morality and purpose can only come from God?
That's a way of defining it.
Wait, that's actually a good point. Well, that's actually a good point, I think. I think that's a good point. Because if it can't be in science, then where the fuck is it? Then that proves it's supernatural. Or it proves that we don't have morals, that there are no morals, that they're just randomly evolved. I mean, it presupposes morals exist. That's the first problem. You're presupposing morals exist for an atheist, which isn't necessarily true. If we're just randomly evolved creatures and they're just, our altruism and empathy and moral conscience are just constructs of randomly evolved creatures that just happen to evolve these functions in order to survive, then there is no justification for these. These are just random chemical evolutionary impulses. There's no justification for them. They're just made up. So there are no morals. But if there were morals and they weren't in science, then I think that is a good point. That where else would they come from? I mean, he'll make something up, maybe, but we'll see.
Yes.
Okay.
That's right. That's good. So I would say that with regard to the first claim, say, atheists don't understand what they're rejecting. Because I would say, by definition, God is the unity upon which moral claims are based.
I think this is this is a good argument, because this is what I say is like, if you destroy the materialist position, then where do you get morals? You want morals, you want epistemology, you want ontology, you want ethics, you want to have these things within your worldview. And if they're destroyed within atheism, i.e. morality and purpose cannot be found within science, then what paradigm allows you to still have those things? Well, you have to choose a paradigm. You can't have no paradigm. You have to have you have to have a worldview, and if it's not within the evolutionist, materialist, atheist worldview, if you can effectively debunk those and disprove them, then the only way to still retain those morals, ethics, would have to be from a would be the opposite, right? Now there could be other systems, like you could say it's Gnostic, you could say it's pagan, you could say it's Buddhist or whatever, right? So it doesn't necessarily prove a particular religion, but if you still want those things, you would have to appeal to another paradigm. You would have to start looking amongst another paradigm to actually justify morals if you want to keep them. Because you could be a nihilist and say, well, there is no purpose, there is no meaning, everything's just made up.
That's a definition, right?
Okay, if there is a God, what is the purpose of life?
Well, in the Christian tradition, the purpose of life is to engage in voluntary, upward, self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
Kind of. Our goal is to bring glory to God. As his creation, we are meant to glorify him. So, kind of.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell?
Yes, that's a good way of
No.
of thinking about it.
What is the purpose of heaven? Do you understand?
That's a wrong way of looking about it. Heaven is a unity with God. It's not like it's a purpose. The purpose is to spend unity and regain communion with God. I've never heard that. Oh, the stupid fucking faggot Wi-Fi is going to take 5 hours. To achieve deification, theosis, united with God. Yep, that was to become united with God. I was right. I like being right. Oh, this thing is being fucking slow. Holy fuck. 1 second, guys. Man, this thing's fucking slow. Holy fuck, dude. I'm just gonna leave this in the video, because fuck. Holy fuck. Holy, my entire thing broke. No, it's broken. It's broken. It's broken. Fucking broken. Useless. Alright. Apologies, people. I just hate when my technology does not work. I get a little bit angry. All right, back into it.
So here's the deal.
At
we
minimum,
can get
it's
into
the
an
opposite
infinite.
of endless suffering. How about
Theosis. It's to regain unity with God, to enter communion with God, reunite with Him.
Okay, and so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth? And if we can achieve infinite suffering on planet Earth without God, avoiding it, if we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim? Okay.
That's right. That's good. So I would say self-sacrifice so that the kingdom of heaven can be established on earth.
So you're trying to make it to heaven and avoid hell.
Yes, that's a good way of thinking about it.
What is the purpose of heaven?
Like, I would think of heaven, I mean, yes, heaven is a place, but another way to think about it is heaven is unity with God, hell is distance from God. That's an easier way to think about heaven as opposed to a place. I mean, it is a spiritual plane, it is a place, but it's not a spatio-temporal place. Instead, it's more defined about unity with God and separation from God. So when he says bring heaven to earth, what he's saying is make earth closer to God. Well, how do you do that? You abide by his morals, you bring glory to God. So he's kind of right, but his language is a bit off. The purpose of heaven would be to reunite with God.
Heaven. Do you understand? So here's the deal.
We can get into
it's the
opposite of endless suffering. How about that?
Okay, and so should we not try to achieve infinite suffering on planet?
And that's also wrong. There's different kinds of suffering. There's like suffering by being separated from God, which is like death, spiritual death and suffering in that sense. And then there's good suffering or noble suffering that is used that's caused by the world. So it's tricky because you can endure suffering for a noble cause, or you can suffer simply as a consequence of your sin. So when you say avoid suffering, what you're really saying is like avoid hell, avoid separation from God, or is it avoid difficulty? It's complicated. I mean, the reason we suffer on earth is because earth has experienced the effects of Adam's sin. With Adam's first sin, and I mean Eve's first sin, let's be honest, death entered the world. So then suffering became a part of the human condition. And I don't believe in the Augustinian original sin that the Catholics believe, which is that we all experience the guilt of Adam. I just believe that we experience the effects of Adam's sin, which is death has entered the world. Not that we carry the guilt, the actual moral sin, I guess, the original, like we carry the effect of Adam's sin, and that's what I would mean by original sin, not the guilt or the moral transgression of Adam.
Planet Earth, and if we can achieve
anyway, but that's why death has entered the world. That's why there's suffering in the world. But sometimes suffering is good because it can be used to glorify God.
And suffering on planet Earth without God, avoiding it. If we can do that without God, then does that defeat your claim?
Well, yeah, except that it doesn't. You circumvented my initial definition because I said that by definition, God was the unified source of morality. And so if we engage in a moral exercise...
And when you're talking about morality, though, when you really reverse engineer it and you get it down to its root, you're a psychologist, it really seems like it just has to deal with motivation. People are saying there is a God,
It's more specific than that.
It's not just motivation, I don't know. That's psychologism, no one believes that. That was debunked 15 years ago. No, that's not true.
Well, so let me ask you this. So if there is a God and there is a moral code and it doesn't come at your benefit, are you going to follow it?
This is retarded. I'm sorry, guys. I'm getting emotionally upset. If it doesn't come at your benefit, oh my fucking God. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to use the Lord's name in vain. I mean, please tell me everyone in the audience understands why I'm mad. Your benefit assumes a value judgment. Saying something doesn't follow your benefit assumes some kind of value judgment. And if you're a Christian, your value judgment would be the will of God. And so God would never tell you something that goes against the will of God. So it would be a contradiction. So it's circular. Well, what if it goes against your benefit? Well, my benefit is to do whatever is in communion with God. So God could never tell me to do something that goes against being in communion with him, so it's impossible. It's like saying, but what if X tells you to do not X? Well, I'm like, well, it's X. It's a contradiction.
It depends on how you define your benefit.
There you go.
If it's going to come at your expense, would you still follow it?
Expense.
If God came...
Right, because there's spiritual expense and there's bodily expense. No, this guy is stupid argument.
Down and said, here is my moral code, and you should follow it. But even if you follow it, you are
even if you die, yes. Because God's law transcends physical death. That's why he says the greatest thing you can do is lay down your life for one of your own. Because he's saying, my ways are higher than your ways. God's law is higher than human law. Valuing yourself in money, materialism, even your own life, is transcended by God's law. That is the entire argument, and he's just completely missing it.
Going to end up in hell. Are you going to follow it?
No, it's retarded. God would never tell you to do something that sends you to hell, you idiot. You idiot.
Well, that was the question that was put to Job and to Christ, right? Because they were required... Hang on, I'm answering your question. They were required to withstand trials that would break anyone and maintain their upward orientation regardless.
And they did that with the motivation of believing that this omnipotent, all-loving God would...
No, this is retarded. Because motivation assumes a value judgment. That's the problem. And the value judgment would be God. So it's contradiction.
Somehow turn it into a benefit. So they still did it solely for their benefit. So
no,
when you...
yes, they did.
Well, no, they didn't. First of all, you're defining your benefit. It's not your benefit. It's for God, which is not yourself by definition.
Yes, they did.
Hang on. Let's define benefit. Like, if I did something for your sister, would that be to your benefit? Like, how are you defining your benefit? Do you mean one of your whims gratified now? Or do you mean you and everyone you love and know over some reasonable span of time? Like,
so
what do you mean by
when you're talking about whims, I think you're talking about something that's more dopamine. When you're talking about morality, you're talking about something...
Right, because my benefit or my motivation assumes some kind of universal value judgment for the individual. And as a Christian, we would just say that's God. So it's a contradiction.
That's more serotonin and more ultimately satisfying. So you and I agree on a lot. I mean, when it comes to talking about how men should be masculine and things of that nature, you and I are 100% in agreement. We just...
Finding commonality does not constitute a universal foundation for benefit.
Don't agree on the justification that God is the only thing that provides morality.
It's not a justification, it's a definition.
What's the difference then? Between a definition and a justification. I mean, it's ultimately psychological.
I mean, and it's not psychological. That's the problem, is this guy's falling into psychologism, which is everything is just a psychological phenomenon. Everything is just a construction of the mind, which is not true. Like, it's easily debunked.
Same thing.
Well, we have to define what we're talking about before we can debate.
Okay, well,
right?
so here's my position.
So I said that God, among other things...
I'm actually a non-theist. I'm not an atheist. I believe the human condition is one of uncertainty. And what that means is that...
Agnostic.
I don't believe that you can conclude there is a God with certainty, and I don't believe that you can conclude that there is a God without in the same position. Now...
It's called agnostic. You can't make claims on God.
With that, I don't care. I still wake up every day and I have motivation to be a moral person.
Define moral.
Moral, what I ought to do.
Okay, and how do you come to that conclusion?
And what I ought to do, ultimately it comes down to what not just benefits me, but...
But no, define motivation. Like, what constitutes your motivations? Because that's really where the ambiguity lies, is this term motivation. Well, I'm motivated to do something. Well, that presupposes telos, or it presupposes some kind of thing, some absolute moral principle, which inspires you to make particular value judgments about what motivates you and what doesn't, and to do something based on, because motivation is just like like a psychologistic reframing of the word, like morals. Well, it's just my motivation. So he's just psychologizing everything.
What benefits the entire planet, what benefits the entire system. I think that your entire moral perspective comes from linear thinking. And when you look at the reality of the universe, it's actually more so holistic. So when you look at how Aristotle defined God, when he said that there had to be an unmoved moved or an uncaused cause, he was defining God from a linear perspective. And you do the same with morality, and you do the same with purpose.
How does my definition of morality? How does my definition of morality hypothetically differ from yours?
Because you're saying that there's something that exists in a vacuum, that it exists in and of itself, and nothing in the universe exists.
Oh my God, this is so stupid. Oh my God, yes, God is not in the universe. God is not a thing in the universe. So this wouldn't apply to God or morals. So this is retarded.
In a vacuum. Nothing exists in and of itself. It's a whole systems-based morality.
For things in the universe, yes. But this would actually lead into tag, the transcendental argument, that various categories exist in tandem with each other, therefore requiring some kind of external justification. Yes, this would actually prove God.
A systems-based reality.
Is there a hierarchical
and that is
structure?
what the quantum...
Is there a hierarchical structure? Are some things more important than others?
Are some things, I think some things lead to more benefits than others.
Then, by your own definition, some things are more important than others.
Yes.
Okay. So there would be an ultimate good, which you would have to call, what, God?
Okay,
what is
pause there. You've been voted out by the majority.
I mean, he was about to say, what is the ultimate good, I think is what he was going to say, which is where you require God as the grounding and justification for that. They were actually like borderline tag. That's where they were. Black woman.
How you doing?
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
I guess since you said morality and purpose cannot be found in science, it would just depend on like what you're referencing. If you're saying a description of your psychological preferences would be considered within science, sure, but I don't think that you have to say that it comes from science in order to be like an atheist. As an agnostic atheist, I don't know if God exists and I don't believe that a God exists. And the only ones that I would really reject would be like the all-knowing, all-powerful.
You can't actually be an agnostic atheist because agnostics affirm that you can't know about God. You can't make knowledge claims about God, whereas the atheist says that God doesn't exist. So they're actually exclusive views.
Powerful, all good, perfect notion of God that plenty of Christians like prescribe themselves. So I guess
how is that relevant to this claim?
You're basing a position of morality and purpose in some like notion of God that isn't the same type of notion of God that typical Christians would prescribe. Your notion of God is
what typical Christians?
Yeah, typically when I talk to Christians, they say that they believe in an all-knowing.
How about Cardinal Newman, who defined God as conscience? He was a major influence on all of Catholic social theory. How about that Christian?
Sure. So do you believe in the all-knowing, all-powerful, all-good notion of God?
What do you mean by believe?
Do you think it to be true?
That's the circular definition. What do you mean when you say you believe?
How is that circular?
Because you added no content to the answer by substituting the word true and believe.
I said you think it to be true.
All right. So if you believe something, you stake your life on.
Okay, this is retarded.
What do you mean by that?
You live.
No, that's not what defines belief. Is like what you do for that belief. That's retarded. It's also circular.
For it, and you die for it. That's what I mean by that.
He's getting all like snappy. Oh, you die for it, sonny boy.
It's something that you say. It isn't something that's associated with logical consistency. It's not declarative. It's not propositional. It's not.
But it's also not defined by its outcomes. Because that's backwards. You say, well, if someone's dying for it, then, like, yeah, that's a good indicator that they have a true conviction in something, but you can have a belief without necessarily dying for it. So the existence of someone dying for their belief doesn't necessarily prove or disprove a convicted belief. There's also people who die for things where they don't really believe it all that much, like tons of soldiers dying in World War II despite not feeling any particular way about it. So that doesn't really prove anything. There's no real link between dying for something and your conviction or belief in something. That also doesn't really define what belief is. It just like the random things you do for a belief don't actually define what belief is.
Figment of your imagination. It's the presupposition of your attention and your action. And you're either fragmented.
No, this is more psychologism. This is the idea that everything is a consequence of behavior, behavioralism, that everything is measured through your output, through your behaviors, which is a backwards way of looking at like philosophy and morals. Like this maybe works if you're like, addiction is defined by its effect on your ability to hold down a job and hold down relationships, which is like looking at a psychological phenomenon and defining it by its outcomes. Everything is a motivation and a response, a input and an output, and defining inputs by their outputs, right? It's kind of reverse. It's kind of messed up. But yeah, this is a product of Peterson's behavioralist psychological background, but it doesn't work for philosophy, because you don't qualify belief or define it or justify it by outcomes.
Fragmented, in which case you worship multiple gods, or there's some unity at the bottom of it that makes you an unstoppable force.
Okay, so you're saying that you don't believe something if you wouldn't die for it?
Not really, no.
Okay. So then,
how would you define belief? Something you say?
Well, I don't know. I don't define it by the outcomes that come from it, because I mean that would be a bit circular.
Can I explain? Like, I could believe it is the case that this pen exists, but if someone like threatened my life, right, I would lie in order to be able to save my life, right? Like, I think you would.
That's true. Yeah, that's actually a good example. Yeah.
Do that too. You wouldn't lie to save your life.
Don't be so sure.
You wouldn't lie to save your life.
How much?
Well, most people wouldn't. So regardless.
What do you know about me? I didn't lie to save my career. I didn't lie to save my clinical practice.
Would you lie to like save your children, your mom, your dad?
I don't think lying would save them.
No, can there ever be a circumstance logically that lying could save someone?
This
yeah, and if you're
this guy's retarded. He can't engage in hypotheticals. Do you know what a hypothetical is, Peterson? If someone was threatening your life and you had to say the pen was not real, it's a hypothetical, dude, to test your logic, like stop being a dumbass.
In sin, you're likely to live in circumstances like that.
I'll give you an example. If you're like in like Nazi Germany, and it is the case that there's like Jewish people in your attic and you're trying to protect them, would you lie to like the Nazis?
I would have done everything I bloody well could, so I wouldn't be in that situation to begin with. It's a hypothetical.
You can't engage in hypotheticals. You're retarded.
And it's
you
not
can't answer
answerable.
hypotheticals?
No, I can't answer a hypothetical like that because
Did
it's
you eat
far.
today?
Look,
I mean, that's actually a pretty good hypothetical. He's saying, would you ever lie or hide a belief under the threat of your life? And tons of people would, because all this guy would have to do is say, okay, well, maybe you wouldn't, Peterson, because you're trying to dodge this, but everybody else is going to lie and say the pen is not a pen so that they don't die, obviously.
Did you
don't play games.
I'm not playing games. I'm just
Yes,
asking if you
you
ate
are.
it.
If you present me with an
This guy's getting, no, it's a hypothetical to test your logic, you dumb old bat.
intractable moral choice that's stripped of context and you back me into a corner, you're playing game.
No, it's not. If you're backed into a corner, it's because your logic is shit.
I just told you I would do everything that I could to make sure that I'm never in that situation.
That's so retarded. How would you feel if you didn't have breakfast this morning? I would do everything in my power to make sure I had breakfast that morning. Dude, what if you didn't have breakfast? That's so retarded.
The time you've got there, you've made so many mistakes that there's nothing you can do that isn't a sin.
Being born in Nazi Germany and trying to protect people that you care about.
Wait, that's actually true. He's blaming Jews for their own circumstance. He's blaming Jews and saying, well, I would have done everything in my power to not be in that circumstance. He's blaming them for being killed. That's actually hilarious. Peterson's an anti-Semite.
Like there could be a Jewish friend that you have, and you want to protect them.
I think you should
have
just
them
give
in your
up on
attic.
that line of questioning.
Give up on just like trying to clarify your position, because
I
you don't
did
like. Are you like
clarify.
uncomfortable with me asking this question? It's just a basic hypothetical. Like I could ask
It's
you.
just a basic
Yeah, yeah.
hypothetical.
It is.
Where
It
you're
actually
like-
is. It is. It's testing your logic. He's just saying, oh, so the qualification for a belief is whether or not you'll die on it. So you don't believe this pen is actually a pen unless you die for it. That's actually a really good hypothetical to prove the absurdity of your logic, because that was stupid.
If you put Jews' lives at stake in Nazi Germany, that's just a basic hypothetical.
Obviously, you would lie in that scenario.
Well, the only reason I went there is because you were being a fucking man baby. You were pissing your pants. You wouldn't fucking answer the pen one. So he made a more extreme one to get you to answer. But now you're going to get offended on behalf of Jews and throw your hands up like a fucking man baby.
Save their life. But you're like not trying to answer this question for some reason.
I just told you why.
Are you anti-fascist? Like, so you're
Why
anti-fascist?
are you asking that?
I was just asking, just clarifying. But like, okay, again, you're not answering this hypothetical because you know it shows that you clearly would lie to save someone's life.
I'm answering it in
Obviously,
a
that's not
manner
what
you
truth
don't
is.
find acceptable.
No, the guy's
Obviously,
right.
it's
The
like
guy's
you're-
right.
I wouldn't be in that scenario.
Obviously, right?
Guys, wow, Peterson. Really, Peterson? You couldn't give the kid an answer? Like, come on, just admit that your qualifier of dying for something is just stupid. That's just a stupid, shitty way to try to justify morals or justify belief in something. That's retarded. Stop being retarded.
Logically, because that's already happened. Like, that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that.
That's true. He's right. These liberals, I'm on team liberal now, guys. I'm a liberal. They're right. He intentionally muddies the waters so that he doesn't have to pick a side and answer foundational questions about Christianity. He's right.
I was in a situation in that scenario.
Obviously, right? Logically, because that's already happened. Like, that's in the past. You don't have a time travel device. We're bringing this logical hypothetical up to show you that in some circumstances that do happen within the real world, you would lie to save people's lives. So your definition of truth isn't actually how we're typically using it. So what you're trying to do is you're trying to muddy the waters when I ask you, like, do you believe this? Do you think this to be true? So you don't actually have to answer the questions. And plenty of Christians don't like that because they clearly see that you don't really like want to be associated with Christianity.
I can imagine that I was in a situation where the best I could do as a consequence of my previous mistakes was to tell the least amount of lie I could manage. But that would likely indicate that I had made all sorts of catastrophic errors on my way there.
So you would lie to save someone's life. So again, you do believe it to be true in that circumstance.
Why is that a hard question? Of course you would lie to save someone's life. Why not? Is that a hard question to answer? Am I wrong? Yes, I would lie to save someone's life. Duh.
Even though you like lied in that scenario. So
not
clearly
without
that's
the
not what you see to be true.
context that I put it in.
You were not willing to die for it. You were not willing to let other people die for it. So that's not what you see to be true then, seemingly.
You're doing exactly what I said you were doing at the beginning of the conversation. You're generating an impossible, restricted, hypothetical.
No, it isn't. Wow, this guy's a man baby.
With no precursors to back me into a corner.
How is it possible? Is there something contradictory about it? Nice to meet you.
Yeah, nice to meet you too.
Great conversation.
Yeah. My next claim is that everybody worships something, including atheists, even though they might not know it.
So what? I mean, that doesn't prove anything. Even if they worship something, I don't care. Stupid black girl. I worship the crystals in the KFC and hanging my mouth open when I talk, 'cause I like taking dick. I want to see this guy.
We can categorize people as Christian.
Well, I would say more or less voluntarily self-sacrificing. Very good.
Thank you so much.
Really, very thoughtful.
All right.
Hey, Dr. Peterson.
How you doing?
Danny, nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Danny.
Danny.
You're saying atheists worship things or people or places, whatever. Can you be very clear about your definition of worship again?
Attend to, prioritize, and sacrifice for.
Okay, that's it. That's your understanding of worship.
Well, I could flesh it out, but that'll do for the time we have.
I mean, that's a good point, because worship, I think there's a specific definition. There's a specific definition. Because there's differences between worship and veneration. Because worship presupposes the divine. Worship is reserved for God alone, while veneration is given to the saints. Worship is an act of adoration, an offering of one's complete self to God. So the word worship actually presumes God. That's kind of the problem. You actually can't really have the word worship in a secular way. It's stolen from, it's a religious piece of language, and it actually presupposes God. It's reserved for God.
Okay. Do Catholics attend to Mary?
Yes.
Okay. So do they fit that description of worship?
Yes.
So you would say Catholics and other people that revere Mary, like the Eastern Orthodox tradition.
That's a good point. So, I mean, is he going to make the point that the word worship is actually defined around God?
Worship Mary.
Well, they might not put her in the highest.
That's actually a good point. That's a good point. No, they don't. We definitely don't worship Mary. That's absurd because she's not God. So simple. Worship is defined by God.
You would put it that way.
That was a good point.
You just said it. Now you're taking it back.
There's
now?
still a hierarchy.
Okay, there's a hierarchy, but within the
There's something at the top.
All right, you can worship things
Mary
below.
is quite a ways up the hierarchy, but not at the top.
Let's go over your definition of worship again. What's your definition of worship?
Attend to.
Attend to.
Prioritize.
Do Catholics
sacrifice for.
Do Catholics attend to? Do they prioritize Mary over all other human beings?
No, I didn't say overall, did I? I didn't add that to my.
Well, yeah. Well, your stupid definition was so vague. Catholics do attend to Mary. They do sacrifice for her, and they do. That's actually a really good point. That's actually a really good point. I never thought about, but that's a really good way. That's a good example.
You understand?
I said there was a hierarchy as well.
You attend to.
So you can attend to something trivially, or you can attend to it deeply.
Okay, now you're adding stuff to the definition, but your original definition.
I added the hierarchy part at the beginning.
Are you
just
familiar?
Didn't understand it.
Are you familiar with the Immaculate Conception?
Why is that relevant?
Because you go to a Catholic church, don't you? Or you've attended recently. You're interested in Catholicism, aren't you?
Sure.
All right. Are you familiar with their doctrines?
Somewhat.
Okay. You're
Their
familiar.
doctrines are very
how do they
deep.
regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
I don't know. I don't know where I am. It's like Peterson, the old man, doesn't know where he is. It's very funny. I mean, he's making a good point that the word worship, your stupid definition of worship doesn't work if it's applied back into a religious context, and then it falls apart because we don't worship Mary. That's retarded.
And I mean,
either you're a Christian or you're not.
To you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell.
I mean, it's a real simple question. Are you an atheist or are you not? Are you a Christian or are you not? Law of non-contradiction, law of excluded middle. The question is not framed improperly. That is a very normal, properly framed question. Are you a Christian or are you not? So, do you believe in the divinity of Christ and his Father and his eternal Holy Spirit or not?
Tell me. I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Oh! Holy fuck! Holy shit! Holy shit! Holy fuck! This guy just demolished him. That's gotta be clipped into oblivion. Holy shit! That was so good. You're quite nothing. That's exactly what Peterson is. He's a whole lot of fucking nothing. A lot of sophistry, a lot of waxing, a lot of gesticulation and hands in the air, a lot of profundity and sophistry, a lot of fucking nothing. He's right.
Hey, I'm done with him.
Nice. He walks away. Nice. Let's fucking go. But that's exactly it. He's right. He's a bunch of nothing. He's not even a Christian. What are you, Peterson? You're north of 60. And what are you? You haven't even figured out what you are. You're like some nihilistic, Gnostic, agnostic, atheistic, liberal, Jungian Jewish weirdo who doesn't even have an actual view of reality yet. You don't even have a proper paradigm. You're just like, you're like a skeptic, but not really. You're a whole lot of nothing. That's damn. Damn. Fuck. That was right on. This guy's a fucking superpower. Look at this fucking guy.
How do they regard Mary?
Why are you asking me that?
Because you're a Christian.
You say that. I haven't claimed that.
Oh, what is this? Is this Christians versus atheists?
I don't know.
That was actually really good.
You don't know where you are right now.
Don't be a smartass.
Well,
that was really good.
I mean,
either you're a Christian or you're not.
I won't talk to you if you're a smartass.
Oh, either you're a Christian or you're not. Which one is it?
I could be either of them, but I don't have to tell you.
You don't have to tell me. I was under the impression I was invited to talk to a Christian. Am I not talking to a Christian?
No, you were invited to.
I think everyone should look at the title of the YouTube channel. You're probably in the wrong YouTube video.
You're really quite something, you are.
Aren't I? But you're really quite nothing. Right? You're not a Christian.
Okay, I'm done with him.
That was right on the money. You're a lot of nothing. One Christian versus 20 atheists. So they changed the title. They changed the title. It used to be One Christian versus 20 atheists. They changed it. Holy fuck. So this guy's right. It was supposed to be One Christian versus 20 atheists. Holy shit. Holy shit. Holy fuck. That guy got him right on the money. Fucking, you're a whole lot of nothing. Damn. That's exactly what he is. I mean, that's what most of these conservatives are anyway. They're a whole lot of nothing. Well, you're not America First. You're not a nationalist. You're not a liberal. You're not a Democrat. Like, what is most of the conservative wing? What are they? They're like kind of Christian. Some of them, not really. Like, what is Peterson? Peterson is the biggest nothing I've ever seen. He's the biggest nothing burger. A ton of sophistry, a ton of language, a ton of rhetoric, a ton of profundity and yapping. And he's nothing. He has nothing to show for himself. He's come up with no good paradigm, no good worldview. Most of the things he says are a bunch of nothing. He makes almost no assertions. Damn, I wish I could have been that kid. That was so good. Holy fuck.
Hi there.
All right, I'm done. That was fucking... Damn. That's a really good point. Peterson is a bunch of nothing. That is exactly what Peterson is. He's a bunch of nothing. Whole lot of nothing. Oh, bomb, nuclear bomb sound effect. Holy shit, that's exactly what it is. You're a whole lot of nothing. And they literally changed the title. Top comment, 86,000 likes. They changed. Damn. That was the perfect. That's perfect. I mean, damn, that was awesome. That was fucking awesome. That was fucking awesome. All right, we're done there, boys. We're gonna leave it on that. Peterson is a bunch of nothing. He has no principles. This is the exact same critique I made for him like a month ago. Let me find that. 1 second, guys. My internet is being extremely retarded because I'm being spied on by Jews all the time. 2 months ago, why I do not like Jordan. He has no principles. He's nothing. He's not a Christian, and really he doesn't have any concrete position, which is incredibly immature as a 65-year-old. How old is this guy? "62-year-old man. This guy is like north of 60, and he doesn't even have a concrete worldview yet. His entire job is to debate people, is to be smart and have a good worldview. That's his entire job. His entire life has been in academia, studying, learning, and he doesn't have any kind of a concrete position on God, yes or no. He can't even answer basics like, are you a Christian, yes or no? Like, simple question, basic question. Well, it's not a simple question. It's complicated and simple question, but it's not a simple problem. It is a simple problem. Do you profess in Jesus Christ? Do you profess in the divine? Do you believe in the Nicene Creed? One Almighty God, His Son Jesus Christ, begotten, not made. Like one Holy Catholic Apostolic Church. All this shit, right? Damn. That was fucking awesome. That was awesome, dude. That fucking kid from Jubilee. That was actually really good, I gotta say. Anyway, I gotta head out. Let me know what you guys think. I thought it was a great episode. Peterson's really falling off the wagon. He was like, you don't even know why you're here, do you? You're in the wrong video. He's like, get out of here, old man. You're in the wrong aisle. Move it along. Oh, fuck. That was hilarious. Yeah, fuck Peterson. But I'm a liberal now, I guess, guys. We're going to be like, free Palestine, I guess. Fucking bitches. All right. See you guys.